Hi, this is Anirban Saha, and I welcome you on behalf of the team to one new episode of Season 2, where we interview a selected few professionals in the domain of data science and converse about what it takes to get a job in the real world. Today, in conversation, we have Mr. Nitol Dutta. Nitol Dutta joined SAP as the Global Partner Manager for SAP Leonardo Machine Learning, and then he became the Global Partner Manager at SAP Data Intelligence. Currently, he is the ecosystem lead of SAP AI. In this discussion, we explore a range of things from what an ecosystem is, the data science landscape and the challenges there, and where he sees SAP in the future. And of course, we discuss what he looks forward to in an applicant. If you like our work, hit the follow button on our LinkedIn page, and the link is given in the podcast description. Also, do share your feedback with us and listen to our other episodes. Let's get started. Nitol, it's a pleasure having you with us today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anirban. The pleasure is very much mine as well. Good morning, good afternoon. Hopefully, it's not late evening for anyone, but if it is, good evening as well. It's a real pleasure to be with you and the rest of the audience today. I'm really looking forward to having this discussion.
For our audience today, could you please explain what an ecosystem for AI is? This might seem a very trivial question, but I'm very sure it is going to be a good conversation starter. Also, because our guest yesterday mentioned ecosystem a couple of times.
Okay. Wow. Yes, I know Steve very well as well. I mean, he was a close partner of mine for a couple of years. Yeah, but sure, Anirban. I mean, I'm happy to give this some flavor. So first of all, I think we all believe that AI is one of the greatest opportunities of our times, right? But at the same time, it is also a challenge of different sorts. Yeah, because AI also calls in for a wide variety of specialization for its adoption in the industry to be more widespread and successful. So what we have seen till now is AI is very widespread in the consumer realm, but really in the business realm, there is still some way to go. So when we think of the AI spectrum, yeah, on the one side, you talk about cutting edge advances in research. You talk about data and aspects like volume, availability, quality of data. You talk about hardware to train and inference AI. So these are the sort of technology prerequisites for AI. On the other side of the spectrum, you also need to think about frameworks in which to apply AI, how you can make AI more relevant for businesses, how you communicate the value of AI, because there is still some apprehension in the market around AI as a topic. Then how do you make AI domain specific, right? So basically what I was talking of is you captured this one side of the spectrum, which is about research, data, about hardware, etc. These are technology prerequisites. On the other side of the spectrum, you need to think about how can you make AI more relevant for business. What are the different frameworks in which you apply AI? And this is not just the software frameworks, but also like governance. How do you take care of it? How do you make AI domain specific? Because general purpose AI has its limits in terms of how you use it in real life. So you have to make it domain specific. How do you have enough skilled people to implement AI? Because even today there is a huge skill gap in AI. Yeah. How do you manage change around AI? Because AI will change how you run your business processes. So you need to manage your people and the environment around it. So it is very apparent that you need an amalgamation of different skills and capabilities in addition to certain technology prerequisites to make both the development and finally, adoption of AI sustain. Yeah. So development is one thing, but also you need it to be adopted, right? So this is where you need these different skills, different capabilities. So this is where you need an ecosystem to function, where different players bring in complementary skills to support the whole life cycle from let's say cutting edge or groundbreaking research to ultimately delivering value to an end consumer. So if I have to talk about concrete examples in this ecosystem, so on the one hand, you have top-notch academia who contribute with research, the Stanfords, the MITs, the Montreal, Toronto ecosystem, etc. You have great open source communities like TensorFlow, PyTorch, etc., etc. You have technology players like NVIDIA, Intel who build best of breed hardware. You have AI first companies like Google, like Microsoft, AWS, who build best of breed general purpose AI technology and functions, and also certain development tooling with it and offer them on their public cloud infrastructure. You also have various hardware OEMs, the Lenovo's, the HPEs of the world, who try to combine the base hardware for AI with the operating system, the network, and other software components, especially keeping customers in mind who don't want to run their AI workloads in the public cloud. And of course, you have plethora of startups, specialized players who try to solve point problems with AI. Yeah, so you have many of these players. Not to forget, you have players like SAP who try to apply AI to business processes. You have many players like Steve from Accenture, yesterday that you had, who provide the services around implementing AI. Because even today, a lot of AI projects are very custom projects. They are not like, lift and shift a template and use it in one customer, use it for the next customer. You have data suppliers, right? You often see that data services like labeling of your images, for example, these are crowdsource activities. And then of course you have the businesses themselves who have been building their own data science and AI teams, trying to apply the best of research to their own business problems and use cases. So in a lot of ways, some or all of these different players have this interdependence to sustain AI from its conceptualization to its implementation. So this is very similar to a traditional ecosystem concept where you need different complementary organisms and functions for the ecosystem to survive and thrive. So hope this clarifies to some extent, what is an ecosystem in the context of AI, what is the scope, what are the different roles the different participants play. Yeah.
So if I may summarize, anyone who is in this domain of AI is a part of it. So as a student, as a part of academia, I am also a part of the ecosystem. If someone is making
Absolutely.
hardware, they are also a part of this ecosystem, because without their contribution,
Correct.
might create a lot of algorithms, but without hardware support, that will not work. Different
Exactly.
startups are also a part of it, because they have teams who are doing their own R&D for
Correct.
various different or organizations working on various business problems. People who
Exactly.
are managers, who also translate business requirements to AI problems, are also a part of this.
Absolutely.
Okay. And of course, there are the open source communities which students are very fond of, and that those communities are very thriving. Okay.
Exactly.
I will ask a very trivial question. How big a stakeholder is academia in this ecosystem?
Yeah. First of all, Anirban, I don't think this is a trivial question at all. This is absolutely the right question. So, academia is where the roots of AI have been for over 50 years, right? From the 1950s, more or less, 60s, before it started getting mainstream in the last 10, 15 years or so. So obviously, this has been a big part of the ecosystem and has been a big contributor. Obviously, there are also better channels now to have a closer interaction between academia and other parts of the ecosystem via, you set communities. So that's one way. The other way is there are many structured programs which are defined as well. That's for sure that there are better channels in which academia also interacts with other parts of the ecosystem. However, one thing is for sure, the next frontiers of AI research will always be defined by the developments in the academic world. The hope is that, now that AI is becoming more mainstream, the turnaround time for commercial application is lower. Yeah, because there will be hopefully more widespread adoption of AI in the industry. One point I would additionally mention here is that the role of academic experts in AI has also gone up, let's say, has been heavily acknowledged by mainstream business in recent times, as evidenced by the fact that many of the current AI leaders in the business world have had deep rooting in the academic world, right? So, for example, our very own Fei Yu Shu at SAP has been in the research community for a couple of decades or more than that, and then she has then successively led AI at Lenovo. And now she is leading the AI at motion at SAP. And this is also what you see in organizations like Microsoft and Google, for example. Very highly reputed AI researchers have led their AI motions. So, one is that they bring in the needed expertise. Two is, they can reduce this hype versus reality gap. This is what academia also helps to temper a little bit. So we know that AI was pushed as a visionary topic for most part of the large decade. In some cases, too many lofty expectations were raised by the capabilities of AI, or surrounding the capabilities of AI. However, in many cases, it was a case of sales and business development voices tempering the expert voice a little bit. And there is still a whole lot of hype and noise around the topic. So how can you cut through the noise? We can see that companies who are serious about AI, like I mentioned before, are putting more and more technically adept and typically academically oriented experts at the helm of their AI strategy. So indeed, beyond the research contribution that it is doing to the ecosystem, I see that academia potentially also has a lot of leadership contribution towards the shaping of this whole AI ecosystem. Yeah.
Okay. As an ecosystem lead,
Mm-hmm.
how do you manage all these stakeholders in the ecosystem? What proactive steps do you take to address the
Mm-hmm.
AI ecosystem? Maybe take all the stakeholders and working closely together. So, as an ecosystem lead,
Yes.
first of all, what is your role?
Mm-hmm.
What proactive steps do you
Yeah.
take?
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of my role, since you asked me, I'm responsible for partner management and ecosystems within the SAP artificial intelligence team, and SAP has many teams, has many broad programs at a corporate level to take care of this topic. And my role is specifically towards how can we further our AI motions with our ecosystem. So before I talk about my role, maybe a couple of lines on what we do. So we have many different established programs at a corporate level to address parts of the ecosystem, from university alliance programs to startup accelerator programs to building implementation capability with providers who are in the services or consulting business, or who want to build and sell solutions or applications. SAP even has a chief partner success officer who is part of the global leadership team, who is responsible for enabling customer success and value via our ecosystem. We also have regular frameworks to exchange between academia and our product teams. So I sit in a product organization, and sometimes this is in the form of research engagements. Sometimes it is a sort of a tooling partnership where we mutually leverage each other's technology. So I think overall at a corporate level, we are very structured at SAP. We have many partners, and we are still learning what are the necessary adaptations that are needed for AI. And this is part of what my role is, to bring this awareness and bring this adaptation into how do we adapt these different corporate programs for our AI ecosystem. So one part of that role, is sort of to be a voice of our partners and ecosystem towards our development teams, so that we can build products and platforms that are in a way partner ready, which our partners can take and then take it to customers. Another part is to adapt product enablement to our and our partner needs, and thirdly, to also infuse partner or ecosystem technology wherever we have white spaces in our portfolio. So for example, voice is a topic where we as SAP decide not to build the technology around it, and so we look at what kind of partner technology do we use, and this is also something that I manage for the team. Specifically, when it comes to academia and AI, we have various ongoing research exchanges. And there is some potential to scale on that for sure. We can do more. We have a certain team that looks at where SAP needs to be 5 or 10 years down the line, and what is the latest in AI in research that can bridge the gap. However, one thing I would point here is that we are, and this is also a lot of the case with many of the organizations. We often see that due to various reasons, it takes time sometimes to productize these conversations. Specifically with respect to how do we interact with academia. So in a sense, I would say that it is this particular part of the ecosystem. It's very dynamic. We will continue to have interaction with research communities where it makes sense for us as a business, and we definitely have the potential to scale on that. Yeah. So I think. In summary, we work mainly with those parts of our ecosystem who bring AI to businesses. This is our first more or less priority. The second priority more or less is to work with providers or ecosystem players who help fill certain white spaces in our portfolio. And then the other part is also to look at where we need to be a few years down the line and whom can we engage with to help us fulfill that. Yeah.
Okay. Since you mentioned about research engagement, as an ecosystem lead, where in which areas would you want the research communities or the academia to focus more in the next 5 years or 10 years?
Mm-hmm. I mean, first of all, I don't consider myself, in a position where I can where I can really tell the research community where to focus on. I mean, there are some hyper trends which Gartner talks about all the time, and you have aspects like artificial general intelligence, more or less, which is one of the huge topics that the research community is focusing on. I mean, right now we have more and more narrow applications of AI. I think that's a good thing, but also I think the research community is going to focus on, how do you make artificial intelligence more and more generic and reusable. I think this is something which we will see potentially. Things around neuromorphic hardware, for example, more around augmented intelligence. These are some of the areas which are being highlighted. And I think we will also see a lot of development beyond and research community in in the business realm. So I mean, the one thing that I would suggest to, let's say, to students more or less is, if you're talking of AI implementation, then I would suggest not to be restrictive only to certain domains, but really pick up good practical projects. Of course, computer vision as an area and natural language processing, these are, as broad topics, these seem to be more mature areas. We tend to see more use cases and more momentum in the market around these capabilities. My caution, to especially to the student community, which is part of the research community, would be to try and invest efforts not just in pure science projects. I think AI is starting to move beyond just science projects, but ones that are closer to practical applications. That would be my only small tip. And I have a lot of respect for what the research community does, anyways. So really curious to see how this shapes up in the next 3 to 5 years.
I have another question.
Mhm.
As students of data science, we understand the complexities of this technology. Like you mentioned, there was this hype versus reality. Um,
Mhm.
has it ever been that you have set higher expectations for a client or a partner and the product did not deliver as much? And
Mhm.
I'm sorry if this.
No, this is a good question, but I mean, firstly, there are two things I like to point out, which you can assume are a general rule. So first of all, I don't think any product would have ever met all expectations of a customer, because there are many dimensions to a product. It's not just about feature functionalities. It's about things like security, enterprise readiness. It's about how do you scale for performance, and et cetera, et cetera. And it is also, in a way, a customer's duty to sort of push the provider to be better. Therefore, we also try to look at engagements which are sort of more of partnership than like one-way street. One is, we push the product and we disappear. The customer says, hey, you don't meet 50 requirements, and then figure out your own way to solve this. I don't think this is how it happens in real life. So there is sort of a cohesive relationship that needs to be built. However, beyond the normal technology implementation in the last sort of 40 years or so, which have followed this whole digitalization trend, this is compounded with AI because, as you said, you spoke about complexities. There is this heavy interlink with the currency of the data that is behind the training of your algorithms, right? So therefore, I think there are some fundamental issues in the field of AI that make expectation setting upfront very, very important with the customer. And these are some of the principles that we follow, which is, clearly defining the use case and the problem. Yeah, this for us is very, very important. It's not about the biggest moonshots, right? It's about the biggest, the most valuable point problems that we can solve. This is one thing. Then clearly defining the data requirements and the surrounding architecture to make this successful, to make this scalable, right? This is also something which is important to put some thoughts up front. Thirdly, think of productization and operationalization upfront, even when you are validating an AI use case. So when you are validating an AI use case, it's not just about saying, okay, image classification is going to be the best service for this use case, or we need OCR or something like that in addition, right? This is not where you should stop. You should think about, okay, tomorrow if I have to bring this solution to 10,000 end users, what kind of hardware do I require? How do I scale it? How do I make it available in different time zones? Yeah, what kind of support model do I need to put to support this, right? So you have to think of these things, together with your customers, very clearly clarify these needs and design this upfront when you are validating an AI use case. And the last point that I would like to mention here is around the value articulation and ROI for the customer. Because as I said and you said just now, there is so much noise, and the reality of the matter is there have not been too many successful large AI implementations in the world yet. Yeah. So I would say that the mantra is to be transparent and practical. Um do jointly with the customer and iteratively. This is what we follow. Don't promise sky. Yeah, we know that a lot of tall promises were made 10 years back by different companies. I don't want to name them. You need to prepare your sales and pre-sales folks well. This is what we try to do at SAP, so that they're not taking customers in a different lateral direction. And when it comes to projects, start small, possibly have multiple quality gates, iterate, and then expand. Yeah. So these are some of the basic principles that I would see, put into place if you really want to meet sort of customer expectations, and not just once, but on an ongoing basis. Yeah.
I'll ask a follow-up question.
Mm-hmm.
Since you mentioned that the currency is data, and you also
Mm-hmm.
mentioned one of the partners in this ecosystem are data labeling companies, and data might not be that good for
Mm-hmm.
ready implementation. So my follow-up question would be, how prepared are the clients?
Mm.
Because from the customer's point of view, they have expectations which are sky high
Correct.
expectations, as you mentioned. So that is one. How good is their data already? Second would be, wouldn't there be privacy or ethical concerns? Because they might want to accelerate, race through the process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whereas you might think, okay, if we do this, then it might be a little issue, a concern. Then the third and a classical problem would be the bias in the data. If the data is at all
Sure.
applicable to whatever you're trying to make. So how do you address this kind of concerns?
I think Anirban, you raise some really good points. There are many different points that you raise here. Whether it is preparedness, whether it is data, expectation setting. I think part of it was answered, but also privacy, ethical concerns, etc., etc. So AI projects typically do involve a lot of discovery and education in the whole end-to-end process, right? So this is where, like I said, you need to see some expectation. You need to have some expectation setting with the customers and do it jointly. How prepared are the clients? Honestly speaking, while we see customer maturity improving, and there are some which are very far advanced, they have their own data science teams and processes in place for AI driven development. Even coming back to the point, we see customer maturity improving, and there are many customers which have data science teams also, and they have like end-to-end processes around how do you drive AI use case development. But there is still a lot of awareness gap in the industry. This is because AI challenges many conventional notions, not just in the software development process. It is not just about the tooling or the prerequisites, like you need different kinds of hardware, you need you need data, etc., etc. It's also the preparedness to define your governance framework around AI. So exactly as you said, ethics. Yeah, this is a very important topic for us, and this is also a very important research topic. Dealing with bias in data. Yeah, explainability of data, explainability of your models, why your certain model has classified a certain input data in a certain way. These are all very important topics, and all of us who are seriously looking at this space are looking at all of these aspects holistically when we look at how do we take this to customers. Another critical aspect is managing change. Yeah, this is very important. How do you reskill and redeploy people? This is also something which customers have to think about. Yeah. And there are a lot of developments around all of these aspects, especially around aspects of governance, ethics, bias, explainability, around how do you get, let's say, better quality data? How do you have your contractual frameworks in such a way with your customers that you can use the data, right? Because many times the customers want certain outcomes, but there is not a lot of, let's say, openness towards sharing certain kind of data. So how do you offer yourself as a trusted sort of partner to your customers as you deal with the data? These are all aspects which are developing in the next couple of years, and hopefully we as the industry and emerging leaders like you all would help shape this in the years to come. I mean, there is a lot of things that need to happen still in this space.
You graduated your MBA during a time that big data or AI wasn't even popular.
Mm-hmm.
And practically everything that has happened when you are working. You have seen
Sure.
the landscape change so far.
Yeah.
Where do you see the landscape shifting from here? And in your personal opinion, how do you see it going forward in the next 5 or 6 years? And where, as the ecosystem lead, will you position SAP AI in that landscape?
Okay, so there were a couple of different questions here. Question here. One was about the whole landscape changing, and then you wanted to know my opinion about how the landscape could shift. So let me take the first part. Initially. So for starters, I don't remember many data science position offered in those times. So I graduated 12 years back. I mean, I feel like an old man with you guys, but okay.
I graduated
It's not.
10 years back.
Oh, okay.
That's why
Yeah, okay, good. So, you and I are aware that there are not many data science positions offered in those times. And I recently watched this Netflix documentary, Alma Matters, and this was focusing on IIT KGP. And it was striking how students were vying for, data specific roles. Yeah, this was one of the hot sort of topics in the campuses. Yeah, and I don't remember this was the case at that time. I do remember at the turn of the previous decade that there were a few data focused companies, and I was in Bangalore at that time. They were cropping up and they were starting to offer business analysis roles, and yes, it indeed seemed to be a natural evolution from digitization to starting to analyze the data. So maybe 50 years back, the world started digitizing paper information, and then over a period of time, we had enough data which we could start to analyze, right? So this was sort of the trend in which it was going. And at that time, business intelligence and data mining were key sort of upcoming topics. There were investments being made in this space. There were acquisitions happening. And the application of this, business intelligence data mining, this was more around, let's say, around C-suites, especially like, analysis of financial reports, sales figures by regions, etc., and improve decision making around this. So this was very sort of small target base, I would say, in most cases. Of course, then as we started in the 2010s, there was a huge focus in the early parts of the last decade around how you could start analyzing all of the structured data that lay in databases and how do you improve access to databases, right? So this was this was one aspect. Then as data volume started growing exponentially, a few things happened. On the one hand, we tried to look at new data architectures, whether it was the likes of Hadoop, to handle this volume, make this data accessible. On the other hand, we saw that deep learning, so machine learning was already there, but deep learning as a field, it started to develop more and more. And then hardware technology, especially as GPUs started progressing, we started seeing first consumer grade and scientific applications addressing unstructured data, right? So we had the image nets and a lot of different competitions which were trying to sort of figure out how could AI perform versus humans, and then there was some tipping point where AI started outperforming humans in certain aspects. So then, when this started happening, and when Jeopardy happened, and when all of these consumer grade inspirations came up, then we started to see a lot of moonshot thinking in the industry, which said, okay, we have certain technology prerequisites that are in place. Where could we apply this technology now? And then the first broad areas like NLP, natural language processing, and chatbots, these topics came up. Voice, how do you apply voice? And that's where you spoke about Siri at the top of the session. Computer vision, right? So especially around image classification or object detection, these kinds of use cases started to see more attention and investment. Enterprises have started to imagine where they could leverage the power of big data more. So I don't think you will see any large company which is not talking about the power of big data and AI in their pitches. The software market saw a lot of consolidation with big bets and acquisitions. But also there is, there are a lot of startups that came up. There is also a lot more clutter and noise in the market now, and we need to see that settle down a little bit. So indeed, the landscape has evolved a lot, from technology to architecture, offerings to use case applications in the practical world, to also the kind of skills and people who are executing this. So one of the things that we, for example, are now doing is we are defining AI specific roles and responsibilities that with which we want to shape some of the workforce of the future. So these are all different aspects where the landscape has evolved. And now, you asked me about landscape shifting. So, well, Ariba, I think one of the recent trends we see is that there is not enough time for science fiction projects anymore, as education helps improve awareness around limits and constraints of AI technology. I personally feel the business world will start to benefit more from the real applications of AI. So even today, when you look at statistics, maybe 2%, only 20% of AI use cases or so are being productized in the real world. What happens to the 80%? This is just some experimentation, and you just leave it aside. This is not what is going to happen, because use cases will be more well defined. The question for the industry will always be, how soon can I commercialize this, right? How soon can I commercialize this application of AI? So I believe, since there is this motivation now, we will see more point applications of AI technology. So this is a general trend. In terms of other things, I see aspects like enterprise readiness. This will be very, very important. Because a lot of what is out there in the open source world, you cannot consume it in an enterprise context. You have to build a lot of abstraction. You have to build a lot of wrappers around it to make it consumable. Data privacy. This is extremely important, and there are more and more stringent regulations. GDPR came into place 3 years back, but also now there is talk of a special data privacy regulation for AI, so within EU. So we have to see where this goes. Ethics and explainability, these are going to be hot topics, continue to be key topics surrounding the AI technology itself. Why? Because no CIO in a customer would like to be questioned around why a certain AI was resulting in data breaches, or was resulting in certain outcomes which was totally different from what was expected, right? So all of these aspects will be very, very solid topics surrounding the AI technology itself. The last part of you asked me was about AI, SAP, right? So SAP is not a general purpose AI technology provider. Our focus is mainly on the use of AI surrounding core business applications, because we have built a business over 50 years around core business applications. So, and since our customers are enterprise customers, right? So all the aspects that I highlighted, like enterprise readiness, data privacy, etc., these are as important, if not more important, topics for us vis-a-vis the technology itself. And while we develop certain core capabilities, for example, in areas like deep learning for business document processing, right? So we as SAP, our systems deal with kinds of business documents, understand semantics better of those documents. So therefore, application of deep learning for business document processing is one area where we will continue to invest our efforts. And there will be other areas where we will partner, like voice, as I said before, yeah. And we will continue to have an open approach towards making, let's say, the best AI technology consumable for enterprises. This is how I would position us. Yeah, not general purpose, focused on enterprise value and building AI surrounding core business applications. Yeah.
Okay, we are left with 15 minutes and have three questions, main three questions.
Okay.
First is, most of our audience at this moment are international students of data science in Germany, and a lot of them are Indians. You are one of the two Indians we are interviewing this season. So let me ask you a very obvious question. You grew up in India, I think Shilchar and Calcutta. You grew up in India and you have worked in Germany, right? So what other differences in work culture did you notice the most?
Yeah, so I mean, yes, I grew up in India, of course, and I had the opportunity to work for about 6 years in India, and across startup and large corporate setups, yeah, before moving to Germany. And now I've been working for about 7 years now here. So there are some noticeable, differences and pros and cons to each. In Germany, you typically see a lot more emphasis on planning and structure in your work. This is the general trend I've seen. Usually, decision making is very systematic. Yeah, it involves larger groups of people, so you need to align at different levels before you make decisions, and so sometimes decision making can take a bit of its own time. Also, people very clearly segregate between, what's your work and what's your life. I think this is something which I have clearly observed as well. In India, on the other hand, it is about speed and agility. Yeah, decision making is usually fast. I mean, I'm talking of the corporate setup, so it may not be the case in non-corporate setups, but in corporate setups, typically decision making is usually fast. Sometimes speed could trump quality. Yeah. This is a bit of a yellow flag or a red flag, if I may call. But people are also very flexible and resourceful. The environment in India challenges you to a lot to learn and to apply your stuff fast. You could take a bit more time here. I personally believe in bringing a mix of both. So the structure, planning, and focus on quality that is typical of Germany, plus the flexibility, agility, and resourcefulness to adapt to circumstances, that is probably a bit more typical in India. And I think we who some of us who bring that mix, I think we really contribute to the diversity of the work setups here, and we also push the organizations here to perform at a faster speed. But at the same time, we also pick up these good qualities, like how do you structure your work, how do you plan it properly, don't jump to conclusions easily. These are things which we learn and we combine. But what is common, whether it is India or Germany, is the need to network and build trustful professional relationships. So these help you in more ways than one. Of course, as I said, there are varying levels of bureaucracy sometimes that you see as well in both cultures. I mean, sometimes organizations are a little flat, sometimes they are let's say more tree-like, and it is also not the same in one company. So there could be one part of one company which is flat, the other part is more tree-like, and this is the same whether it is India or Germany, and I've experienced both. So I'm grateful to have had this opportunity to experience and learn many work lessons from both work cultures. Neither is like, let's say, you can have pros and cons in both, and it's about a mix of them that I see as sort of critical for us to make some difference in our work setups.
So, if there are young working professionals listening to this podcast right now, and who are internationals, who are young, who are coming to Germany, coming to Europe, from various different countries, be it Middle East, India, the entire subcontinent, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Africa, and many other places, what would be your tips for them?
Yeah. I would say that the German social fabric, first of all, I don't think it is very different from ours, in terms of how the people are generally set up. In the settings that I've worked in, I've had a very diverse and international mix. In general, I see that people are friendly and always lend you an ear if you make sense. So I would just say some of the things which may seem obvious, which is try to understand the context and setting a bit as you step into a certain work culture. Be a good observer, be a good listener, and try to be adaptive and flexible. Very important, don't jump into judgment or conclusions very easily. You need to give people time. You also need to take your own time. So I think one of the distinct differences that I have had personally is that we take more time now in our activities, and when you think your actions and you work through, then you get recognized right for the quality of your work. So therefore take your time, don't jump into things, and be adaptive, be flexible, be a good observer, be a good listener. Last but not the least, it does not harm, and don't be scared also to pick up the language. I'm sure probably many of you are already in that sort of learning mode, or have already picked up the language to a good extent. I think this is beneficial. In international settings, it is not like a disqualifying criteria, but of course, if you pick the language, there are many more opportunities to network socially, because socially networking also in your work environment is something which could take you places. And finally, you become a more attractive proposition in the job market with that, right? So yeah, pick the language as well. I would say that.
Yeah. Did you pick the language up in the last few years?
Yes, I mean, I'm currently at B2 level, so I would have loved to be C1 already, but yeah, I mean, the odd conversations I can do, even in a business setting, I can do the odd conversations in German. Of course, because I have worked more international environment. So you always tend to have a very mixed setup in your team. So English becomes the de facto language. And I know that there are people who have spent like 25 years here, and they said that 20 years back they did not have that benefit, so they were forced to learn the language. But anyways, I personally have benefited, yeah, from learning the language, and not just in my work life, right? I mean, we deal with many settings in our day-to-day life as well, where your knowledge of the language helps, and you're not just of the language but also of the overall social setup, yeah, how it functions, yeah, what for example, what kind of insurances do you need to take, how do we help you in your day-to-day life. I think these are things which also help you, yeah, as you integrate into the overall setting.
Yeah, I still mix between genders, but that's okay. Since you mentioned team, I'll come to the last question. You definitely
Mm-hmm,
have your say when you build your team. So, what do you
mm-hmm,
personally look forward to? Which personality traits do you look forward to in a teammate that you have to work with closely? You mentioned that the person has to be a good
mm-hmm,
observer, a good listener, should make sense.
mm-hmm.
What except for these? Which personality trait do you look
Yeah.
for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I look for a sound analytical thought process. This is important for me because you need to have that thought process, right, to execute on your activities, and sometimes you have to make decisions on your own, right? So this also helps you become independent faster. Secondly, attitude to learn and be adaptable. I think this is very important. You, me, all of us who have spent some time in this industry know that the pace at which it has changed is humongous, and it will continue to be like that. So we have to be always having this adaptability in our mind. Ideally, I look for empathetic professionals as well. So, someone who is not just in their own shoes, but also thinks of what the partner or the customer or another colleague would have at stake in a certain conversation. So, I mean, this is also something which tends to be developed, and I look for more in the more senior colleagues. But someone with some empathy is also a very good skill to have for the job, for the work environment. And then a sense of responsibility and accountability. I think this is very important. um, I mean, if you are given a task, then hold yourself accountable for that. I think this is something which I try to see in the colleagues that I work with. So demonstrating the willingness to be a team player, this is also very important. I mean, as I said, of course, I look for certain basic skills that you need for the job. But for me, attitude trumps ability in most cases. Yeah. So I hope that gives you a flavor, at least in terms of what I look for. Yeah.
That was really insightful.
Mm-hmm.
And I thank you for answering this question this way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we come to an end to this discussion, and I must say
Mm-hmm.
that, okay, let's put it this way. My career started as a SAP ABAP developer, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the time when big data term was also coined.
Sure.
And when I was leaving the company I was working in, SAP HANA was just beginning to gain the ground. I'm doing my master's in data science
Sure.
now,
Mm-hmm.
where SAP continues
Mm-hmm.
to be one of the market leaders. This
Mm-hmm.
interview has been really, really special, not only at the podcast level, but also at a very personal level. Because Yeah, you answered the questions with examples, with anecdotes, and a lot of the answers were very, very insightful and directly from the heart. And we are of the same age group, coming from the same region in India. You have a lot of inspirational value to a lot of listeners to this podcast, and precisely why this episode is going to be extremely special. And with this, I think we open the session for questions. We have one question that is from Shubham. Any specific programs for students that SAP has?
Yeah. So first of all, before I answer this question, because we are reaching the end of the year, thank you very much also Anirban for this opportunity, and for the I sometimes feel flattered with what you said, and of course, hopefully as a fellow professional, as a as someone who is still also learning the ropes, I hope that we can continue conversations wherever they create value for you. Yeah? And this is not just this forum. If you want to reach out to me, I mean, I'm there on LinkedIn, so that would be a good way to connect. Now, programs for students, right? So SAP has multiple programs for students. We have programs for bachelors. So we have a sort of a academy set up, and there with that setup, typically bachelor students can join us for a few months on certain projects, and this is where we continue to have many students joining us across different fields. Yeah. Then you have the whole concept of interns, of course, and people can intern at us. And then you have the concept of working students, right? So you have typically someone who is ideally maybe 50% in the university and 50% of the time with SAP, and engaged with a certain team in a certain number of projects for maybe a couple of years. Yeah. So I have just had also a working student till last month, and I was really happy with how he performed. And now he's in the industry with one of our partners, doing business development and project management there. So we have all these setups, and of course the ideal setup is you have a student, and that student continues to be at SAP after that, and the evaluator and the student mutually decide on a agreeable career path, and then the student continues at SAP thereafter. So once someone is a working student here, we make all possible attempts from our side to enable the student so that the student can thrive in our setup and potentially also continue with us. But if not, then we also help to find, like, this is something which we do at a personal level, but we try to find also other opportunities for those students. The last thing I would say here is that our current CEO, Christian Klein, he joined SAP as a student 22 years back, and now he's the CEO of the company. He has grown along with the company. My current manager joined as a bachelor student 20 years back, and she's now heading product success for AI at SAP. Typically, SAP is such a company that you tend to find something or the other reason why you stick on with the company for longer. Yeah. So we have a careers portal, careers.sap.com. So if some of you are interested, then keep looking there. And if you find a suitable opportunity, apply. And then hopefully we can meet each other as colleagues in some form.
Definitely. And on that positive note, I think we bring an end to this conversation. We got two more questions. but I think both of them were covered in some form or the other
Mhm.
uh, during our conversation.
Sure.
Nitol, thank you so much for finding time and having this interaction with us today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anirban, and thank you to everyone who attended despite your exams. Don't worry, exams will come and go. I mean, I watched India versus Australia uh, test match, which was the Eden Gardens test match, one day before my board exams, and I watched the full day, and then I thought, oh, what have I done? But it all worked out in the end 20 years later. So yeah, all the best, and hopefully we keep interacting in some form or the other.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hey, you have made it till the end of this amazing conversation. Please check this space out next week, Wednesday. Next week, we publish another episode which you might find useful as well. We aim to release one new episode every Wednesday for the next 5 weeks on LinkedIn, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, YouTube, Stitcher, JioSaavn, and some few more platforms. If you find this conversation useful, please share this with your friends and stay connected with us. I thank you for listening.